So this episode contains clips from the full council meeting and the recent cabinet meeting, because good old gung-ho Gordon was back in action. But before we get to Gordon, just a quick update on Middlewick. Now, they had some excellent speakers at the full council meeting. Unfortunately, I thought I'd pressed record and I actually hadn't. But anyway, the long and the short of it is they are keeping excellent pressure on the council. And they too went back at the cabinet meeting to continue it, this time with Alan Short.
I have been attempting to get an explanation of why the letter from Natural England, the statutory body, was withheld from the full council at the meeting to approve the local plan in July 2022.
But I have to thank you for introducing me to a new word, Kafkaesque. Had to look it up. Google tells me it says extremely unpleasant, frightening and confusing and similar to situations described in the novels Franz Kafka. Slightly in the dark was what you would have liked to have seen in that letter, because I just couldn't see a parallel between what was sent to you and that description.
Oh, I don't know. I think trying to get through to Colchester Council is very Kafka's castle. But anyway, moving on, this debate went on for quite some time. The long and the short of it is, and this will come as no surprise, it's nobody's fault. Councillor Luxford Vaughan wasn't even a councillor when this debacle first started, nor was it Martin Goss's fault.
Which is I didn't suppress any letter and in fact referenced it in my speech, which is still available online.
But nobody seems to be saying whose fault it is that this vital document did not get put in front of the councillors when it should have done.
Well, I'd like to know who did receive the letter from Natural England, because it came before the full council met and that letter was not given to the full council. And the idea that a decision has been made and that's it, and new information comes along, you can't unmake that decision, is in my view false. That's the sort of thing Kafka talked about. If you'd read his novels, you'd realise he got perfectly truthful information which was of no use to him whatsoever and passed then from pillar to post.
Oh, we all know that feeling, Alan. And now onto the toilet travesty of Old Castle Park. Yes, sadly they've had to close the lavatories in order to save money.
I have no criticism of any council of any political persuasion, but I've yet to see an election leaflet which says vote for me and I won't make decisions because I'll hand them over to officers. There's too much delegated decision making. It's time that councillors took back control. You have given away too much power to officials who are not answerable to the electorate. Why is an officer or officers shutting toilets in Castle Park? If they're to be shut, that decision should be taken by elected representatives who are answerable to the electorate. The councillors are the people's servants, and the officers are the servants of the councillors. It's gone the other way around now. This is not local democracy. And then last Thursday, 15 councillors said they didn't want a particular planning application to be approved, and they were gazumped by an officer.
Castle Park toilets, it's an operational decision ultimately agreed with me. And I was consulted on it, and it's part of the cost savings that the council has got to do because of reduction. Shake your head all you like, I'm giving you the facts. The fact is we have to save money, but the closing of toilets and the saving of that is ultimately down to me, and it's ultimately down to the officers to come up with a bunch of options, which is what they did. And I looked at them and said, I don't like that, but I had to make a decision. And if I'm having to save money, if I don't close those toilets, who do I fire? Because that's the kind of conversation it comes down to. And I've said this in public before. If we start laying off frontline staff, then we will end up having to cut frontline services. And that's the difficult decision. Now, I will say I've not had one complaint in writing to any of my inboxes and all the other ways you can contact me. I've not had one complaint about that toilet block from any member of the public. People have raised it on social media, I've responded.
Does that mean the 204 complaints that Colchester Views has on a petition about the closure of said lavatories doesn't count then? Helpfully, I do actually have a list of people who should be sacked from the council, so if Councillor Goss would like to get in touch, I'm happy to provide it for him. Since his preferred method of complaint is email, I'll pop his email address in the description box below, should you feel so inclined as to make your complaint that way.
Out of more than £550,000 of funds that the community safety team will receive, how much will be invested on anti-racism, tolerance, diversity, inclusion-themed schools and public projects.
Like sparing a measly £5,500 to keep the lavatories at Colchester Castle Park open, perhaps?
My second point will be a request of adding hate crime and hate crime report subsection, along with the relevant information and quick links to how to report.
I will ask the officers to look at the option of adding a hate crime reporting button so that we can see how that works. And
So, something to look forward to, a hate crime button appearing on their website. Perhaps they could just get a general hate button so we could let them know what we think of some of their ideas and plans for Colchester. Right, moving on to our final segment, which is Gordon. So what I think Gordon is trying to do is point out to them the unlawfulness of the way they demand council tax. What should be done is it should be an agreement between us and the council as to what we will pay and what for. They shouldn't just be able to demand money and go and spend it on whatever they like, because you and I can't go round demanding money with menaces. So, for example, you wouldn't go round to someone's house, cut their lawn, and then put a demand notice for money through their letterbox. No, you have to have an agreement that, one, they want their lawn cut, and two, they will pay you. You can't cut someone's grass and then threaten to send the boys round or put them in prison if they don't pay you. That's not how the system should work. That applies to us and councils, yet councils do that every day. So this is what I think Gordon is trying to get across to them. Now, like many people, he does mention the fact that councils are corporations, but frankly, they have to be something in order to operate. And also, it says in the Local Government Act to set up a body corporate. So I personally don't have a problem with them being a corporation because they're not a for-profit corporation. They are just a corporation so that they can function as a council. And all you've got to do is look at any set of any accounts of any council in the country and you'll find they are definitely not for profit. Here's what Gordon had to say on the matter.
The council tax guide has said that there are no liability orders. So where is this coming from? I started wondering, well, how did we promulgate liability orders in the first place? Who did that? Why did they do that? And then why did they stop them? Who stopped them? Under what authority did they stop them? And part of the reason we find is because it violates treaties that we've negotiated, one of them being the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 6, where in effect you're compelled to join a group through the council. But when we find out what the council is, we find the council still is a corporation, still under the guidelines of a corporation called Parliament, still under the guidance of a corporation that's in a foreign country that we call London, but it's not England. So you have to start investigating that a little bit more. I wanted to read actually a little bit of Article 6. In practice, the courts seldom issue individual liability orders, and the reason the courts don't sign them is because there would be redress or accountability, which is why judges are required to have their bond and their oath available on site and required to produce it on demand. But many of the courts have not kept the records of these hearings for council tax, and they've passed the burden back to the councils. But there are stakeholders, right, with the council. So the profits that used to be run by the council are now going to stakeholders. But we should go back also to 78 and 79 of the Local Government Act, 1888. Section 79 states that all duties and liabilities of the inhabitants of a county shall become and be duties of the council of such county. It's your burden, the council tax. It's not the inhabitants. You guys have to pay it. And if you don't think that that's accurate, we go back to what Betty Boothroyd said in 1993. She said that the constitutional rights take supremacy over local legislation or any other legislation. That's the hierarchical system. And it says in the Bill of Rights, doesn't it? You should know this, right? Anybody here read the Bill of Rights? No hands. Couple, that's good. It says in there, no grants or fines or forfeitures except by trial by jury. We don't have trials by jury. That means we don't have courts, we have hearings.
You've overrun your 3 minutes, but what I'm about to say, sorry.
But I know that we have these system of things like the Magna Carta, which established our rights in perpetuity. Everybody knows here what in perpetuity means.
I was asking if there was a question that Councillor Pori could answer.
I'm happy to give some reaction. to that. So I was actually teaching today about the Bill of Rights and about Magna Carta. And I was teaching about how we don't have a written constitution and how our democracy has evolved over time due to precedent, due to statute law, due to common law. So I was teaching about that to my class, and we are part of a council. We are residents within a council, and the point of paying council tax and the liability orders that require people to pay council tax is to ensure we work together as a collective, because we've decided through our democracy evolving that that is the best way to provide services for all of us. And it's not that anyone is paying it to a body that is a machine. We are all part of the council, and we are all residents or have a business or a property within that council area. So that is what generally I would respond to you about how council tax works. And of course the Magna Carta in 1215 asked for more rights to be given to the people, from King John down to the Lords. Since then it has improved over time with many different precedents, many different laws, and we've got to this point today where people pay their council tax. It goes towards the different authorities that they live within, and those councils provide services. We have the leader of the county council here, we have the leader of the district council here. We're all here representing our residents and you, part of this body, but we are all members of it too. So there's no faceless bureaucracy. It is us, it is we the people. Thank you.
This is a corporation. What the difference, what you are being told to teach by book, the book is wrong. We are not residents, we're inhabitants. The council tax applies to UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. That was the shift in the structure where the commercial aspect would take over the duties and liabilities. And the ancient common law, as I was saying, it takes precedent. And that's the point of bringing up the issue with Betty Boothroyd in 1993. She established the hierarchical statutes and constitution where they lay in that form. It was reinforced in Metric Martyr's case, the same thing on appeal. So when you say that we're residents, you're inaccurate. When you talk about the council tax, you need to go back to the books on this because they're not correct. It sounds like you're grooming the children the way that it does. Because your terminology is inaccurate.
I'm afraid your terminology is vexatious, so please do not say what you just said. But I've listened and I've responded, so hopefully that has been helpful this evening. Thank you.
I've had this conversation several times where the books are not accurate. You need to review the accurate, you need to review the books.
Now, it's not just the councillors that don't seem to grasp the relevance of these foundational documents, like the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights. A member of the public wrote in saying that the Magna Carta isn't relevant to today. But there we go, Gordon did try his best to reach people. And then he went back to full cabinet to say this.
I wanted to follow up on our full council meeting, and we were discussing the Constitution. There seems to be some doubts that the Great Charter was anything but the Constitution. Why would you think it wasn't anything? Why do you think they put in perpetuity in the document? Because they wanted that to survive. Already by 1368, we had to pass legislation, the Observation of Due Process of Law Act. It only took a few years before the decay of the process. The corruption was setting in then. It does it repeatedly and repeatedly. To take a sidetrack to get to the set point, there have been studies of small communities. In small communities, psychologically, socially, they do best when they're in very small groups. You get to a number of about 500 and the psychopaths start to rise to the surface. They start to gain control. And the problem is exacerbated by the greater the population. It seems a similar situation keeps reoccurring in government. We go back to 1835, Local Government Act. What happened? Good act. It got corrupted. By 1888, they had to write a new act. Another good act. What keeps happening though? It gets corrupted. In that act, it says the council is liable for all the duties and liabilities of the inhabitants of the county. Are you paying people's electric bill? Are you paying people's gas bill? These are liabilities and duties that you're required to pay. going back to the point, though, with the Constitution, this legislation is pretty clear. If you go to the history of that, we go to 1993, Betty Boothroyd, and I was trying to make this real clear to you guys, because what's happening when you send out letters for an invoice or bill to people to pay council tax, that is uttering. That is a criminal offence. You might want to look at UCC. Back in 2023, I think it was broadly advertised that corporate officers and managers are liable when it comes to crimes like that. Personally liable. There is no indemnification. You can't, bond won't cover those debts, those duties. So for some reason, you've ignored the liability factor and you're charging people. You're making at both ends on this deal with what appears no responsibility. And we look at the assets of the council. We look at what they're doing with this. It looks like money laundering. But just to finalise on this issue, you said you had a class on the Constitution when we spoke on Wednesday. And I sent you an email asking you for the ISBN number of the book that you're using to teach the students, because I think it might need editing. But the biggest problem was the response to grooming. When I use the word grooming, all of a sudden it had a sexual connotation to it. And if your elementary psychological study will tell you, what are people hiding?
Gordon, thank you. So yes, it's in that particular word did have a reaction because it is seen as a negative, and I assumed from your email you did not mean it in that way. So I
absolutely,
yeah. In terms of, it's really difficult for us as a council here to have the conversations about the Constitution and to what extent we do or do not have the right, etc., to collect money. When it comes to councils across the country are all in the same position, and I tried to say that on the evening, that we are here to provide services. We are all residents around this table of the council as well, and we all pay council tax to the council. We do this role in order to try and support our communities and in order to keep a council going that we believe provide a good range of services to our residents to try and support residents. So we believe that there is that moral judgment that we put towards a council to pay council tax. I can continue to look into some of the references you make about whether or not you believe it's legal or not. What I would say, again, going back to your points about the Constitution, we don't have a written Constitution, we don't have a codified Constitution. Our Constitution is based on charters from 1215 onwards, up until Parliament Acts that are just being made only recently. So those do change all the time, and Parliament is absolutely sovereign. So Parliament can decide to withdraw the Human Rights Act, it can decide to withdraw the different acts that you've talked about today, or they can put in new acts. So I will look back at the Local Government Acts and look back at the acts where it says about council tax and the liability to pay or not. But we all have a belief here and across the country that councils are there to represent residents and supply services. And that's the best answer I can really give to you.
First of all, Parliament is not sovereign. It cannot be sovereign. How can it be sovereign if there's no people? Who's going to create Parliament? It's a vacuum then, isn't it? There's nothing. It's a corporation. Parliament is registered with Dun & Bradstreet. It's a completely separate corporation. Everybody who is now what would have been a Crown agent under the Crown Agents Act are now attesting to their oath, and not the Crown Agents Act oath, an oath to the King and the duties of the Constitution. It is a constitution. They hadn't formulated the word constitution in 1215. I'm sorry, that's why they called it the Great Charter. That was the best they could do at that time. And I think they did a pretty good job of that. But these are your laws as well. The people you're referring to who are sovereign made those acts. They're not laws, they're acts. They made those acts, and in them, if you look at the section 78, 79 of the Local Government Act, you might want to write that down. You might also want to look at uttering and fraud as well, because those are the responses to what you're doing.
Thank you.
So,
okay, thank you.
I'll leave a few copies of the light there for anyone.
Thank you. There is no fraud.